The ocean has always had a way of keeping secrets. Long before engines roared across the seas, when ships were still carved from oak and powered by wind, sailors would gather on deck during quiet nights, staring into the black water that stretched endlessly around them. There were no lights then, no machines to explain strange sounds or shapes in the dark, only the moon, the stars, and the slow, steady rhythm of the waves. And every so often, in the soft whisper of the tide, someone would hear something else. A rumble beneath the surface, a slow, rising swell, the faint scrape of something enormous brushing against the hull. Then, silence. That silence was worse than the noise, because when the sea goes quiet, it feels as though it's holding its breath, waiting for something to rise. Stories spread from ship to ship, port to port. They called it the Kraken. No one agreed on what it looked like. Some said it was a creature so large its body could be mistaken for an island. Others swore they saw a forest of tentacles rising from the waves, wrapping around ships, dragging them down into the deep. There were those who claimed to have seen it blink, a single, massive eye opening beneath the surface as big as a sail. Of course, most people back on land didn't believe these tales. They laughed at the idea of sea monsters. But for those who spent their lives on the ocean, the world beneath the waves was a mystery beyond reason. The sea was not a map to them. It was a living thing, unpredictable, endless, and older than memory itself. Imagine being out there in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by water in every direction, the sky fading into blackness, and the ship creaking beneath your feet. You'd hear the ocean sighing against the wood, and once in a while, something brushing the hull. Maybe it was a current. Maybe it was something alive. You couldn't know for sure, and when you can't see what's beneath you, the mind fills in the blanks. That's how the Kraken was born, not from proof, but from fear, imagination, and awe. The earliest stories came from the north, from sailors who braved the icy seas near Norway and Greenland. They spoke of a creature that lived in the coldest waters, surfacing only when it was hungry. It was said to be as large as a mountain, able to drag whole ships under with its arms. Some said when it rose, the sea around it churned like a storm. Others believed it could create whirlpools simply by diving back down. In those days, the sea was the edge of the known world. Maps ended in blank space marked with warnings. Here be monsters. To sail too far north was to tempt fate. Yet, trade and exploration pushed men further and further into the unknown, and every voyage brought new stories. Some captains claimed they had seen the Kraken's tentacles rise through the fog. Others said they had lost crew to something massive pulling them from the deck. There were reports of dead whales washing ashore, covered in strange circular scars as if something had tried to drag them under. Those marks, it turned out, were real, left by the suction cups of giant squids. But at the time, no one knew that. To the people then, it was proof of something much worse. The sailors began to describe the creature in detail. Its arms were long and powerful, its body covered in slick flesh that glistened under moonlight. Its mouth, they said, was a ring of jagged teeth, capable of crushing ships as if they were toys. And its eyes, deep, dark, and unblinking, could see straight through the soul of anyone who dared look back. At night, men whispered these tales in the quiet corners of taverns, their voices low as if afraid the sea itself might be listening. Some claimed the Kraken wasn't just an animal, but a guardian, or a punishment sent by the ocean to remind humanity that not everything should be conquered. The legend grew, layer by layer, with every retelling. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was fascination. The idea that something vast, ancient, and intelligent might live beneath the waves haunted and thrilled people all at once. It made the sea feel alive in a way that was both comforting and terrifying. The ocean, after all, was humanity's first mystery. It was where life began, where countless ships vanished, and where even the bravest sailors knew they were never truly in control. There were times when the sea seemed almost too still, the air heavy with anticipation. That's when men said the Kraken was near. Sometimes the water would bubble as if boiling. The waves would rise, though there was no wind. Birds would suddenly take flight, screaming into the sky. And then, for a heartbeat, the horizon itself would move. A shadow, vast and slow, gliding just beneath the surface. And then, nothing. The calm would return, the sea pretending innocence as if nothing had happened. Was it real? Or just the tricks of the deep, a whale, a wave, a dream made real by fear? No one could say for certain, but those who saw it never forgot. Even now, when we think of the Kraken, it's not just a monster we imagine. It's the feeling of the unknown, of the endless, dark water hiding something ancient, something waiting. Because deep down, even in the age of science and satellites, part of us still believes in monsters, or at least wants to. Not because we're afraid of them, but because they remind us that the world is still bigger than our understanding, that there are still mysteries out there, sleeping beneath the waves. And maybe, just maybe, that's what the sailors really saw. Not a beast, but a glimpse of the ocean's soul. Powerful, beautiful, and untamed. So when you hear the word Kraken, think not of terror, but of wonder. Think of the sea whispering to itself under the stars, hiding secrets older than time, waiting for the next curious mind to listen. Long before the word Kraken spread across the world, before it filled storybooks and sailor songs, it was whispered in the language of the North, the language of ice, wind, and salt. In the days of the Vikings, the sea wasn't just a place, it was a living force, a spirit that demanded respect. To sail those waters was not a casual journey, it was a test of courage, faith, and luck. The Norse people believed that gods watched from the waves. Odin, who saw all things, and Aegir, the god of the sea, whose moods could change as quickly as the tide. And in the depths of those same waters, they said, lived something much older, something that belonged to no god or man, the Kraken. To the Norse, the ocean was endless and cold, a realm of giants and spirits. They told stories of Jörmungandr, the great serpent that encircled the world, sleeping beneath the sea. But there was another creature, smaller in myth but greater in fear, that haunted their journeys. A vast, unseen monster that could swallow ships whole. The earliest written descriptions of the Kraken come from Nordic texts dating back to the 13th century. They spoke of a creature that could rise from the deep, its body so enormous that sailors sometimes mistook it for an island. Men would land on its shore, build fires, even cook meals, until the island began to move. And by then, it was too late. The sea would roar, and the ship, and everyone aboard, would vanish beneath the waves. Imagine that. The sea calm as glass, the fog rolling low, and your ship anchored beside what looks like a dark, rocky island. You hear birds, you smell salt and kelp. Then, the ground beneath you trembles. A deep groan echoes through the hull, like thunder underwater, and suddenly the sea rises. Tentacles whip through the air. The sky and ocean blur together in chaos. And then, silence again. That story traveled fast. For sailors who braved the northern seas, it became a warning, a reminder that the ocean could never be trusted, no matter how calm it seemed. Even centuries later, when science began to replace superstition, those old Norse tales still felt believable. Because the seas around Norway, Iceland, and Greenland were unlike anywhere else, vast, cold, and filled with strange life. Enormous whales breached from the depths. Giant squid carcasses occasionally washed ashore. Whirlpools formed from strong currents, powerful enough to pull ships off course. To the people who lived and died by the sea, these weren't myths, they were possibilities. One of the most famous descriptions came from the 18th century, when a Norwegian bishop named Erik Pontoppidan wrote about the Kraken in his Natural History of Norway. He described it not as a myth, but as a real creature, the largest sea monster in the world. According to his account, it could be 1.5 miles across, and when it surfaced, it raised mountains of water around it. Pontoppidan didn't claim to have seen it himself, but he listened to fishermen who swore they had, men who spent their entire lives at sea, who could tell the difference between a whale, a storm, and something else, something vast and alive beneath their boats. They said when the Kraken appeared, the sea would fill with fish, as though every creature was fleeing from it. It was both a curse and a blessing, danger and fortune, tangled together, because fishermen could fill their nets easily, but they risked being swallowed if they lingered too long. Some described the creature as an enormous crab. Others said it was more like a squid, with arms stretching hundreds of feet long. Whatever its shape, one thing was certain. The Kraken belonged to the deep, and it surfaced only when disturbed. Even today, if you sail through those northern waters, you can feel the same eerie stillness that inspired those stories. The fog hangs low, the air smells sharp and ancient, and the ocean seems to breathe beneath the boat. It's easy to understand how the Vikings saw it as sacred, both friend and foe. For them, every journey began with an offering to the gods, a prayer to return home, and a silent hope that the sea would not awaken its oldest child. Because to meet the Kraken was to meet the unknown itself. In time, those stories spread beyond Scandinavia. Merchants, explorers, and missionaries carried them across Europe. The Kraken became part of a shared mythology, a warning that nature was still bigger than humanity. Maps began to include drawings of the beast, coiling its limbs around ships, rising from the water like a mountain of flesh. But the Norse never meant it as a tale of pure fear. In their stories, the Kraken wasn't evil. It wasn't a demon or a punishment. It was simply there, part of the natural order. A reminder that even in a world of gods and heroes, there were still things no one could control. And that might be why the legend lasted, because it didn't just describe a monster. It described a feeling, the feeling of standing at the edge of something vast and unknowable, the feeling of realizing that the world is still wild, no matter how much we try to understand it. So, when you hear the word Kraken, imagine the north, cold, silent, endless. Imagine the mist curling over dark water, the sound of creaking wood, and the deep, low hum of something moving far below. That's where the legend was born, not from fantasy, but from the quiet truth of the sea itself, that some mysteries are too big to ever fade. The ocean doesn't need monsters to be terrifying. Sometimes it's the silence, the sudden absence of a ship that left port and never came home, that builds the greatest myths. In the centuries when navigation depended on stars, wind, and luck, ships could vanish without a trace. No message, no wreckage, no survivors. Just gone. Families waited on the shore, scanning the horizon for months, hoping to see sails appear. But often they never did, and so stories filled the emptiness. The sea had taken them, perhaps not by storm, but by something alive, something deep. To a sailor, the Kraken wasn't just a tale from the north. It was an explanation, a name for the unexplainable. Imagine sailing through a calm sea at dusk, the sky fading gold to black. The crew tired but content, laughing softly as lanterns flicker against the sails. Then a strange sound rises, a low hum, a bubbling beneath the hull. The ship rocks though the air is still. Someone shouts, leaning over the edge, "Something's moving under us!" The next moments are chaos. Ropes snapping, the deck tilting, water rising faster than reason can explain. And then the ocean closes over the ship, the surface smooth again, as if nothing ever happened. To the men who heard those stories later, it wasn't hard to believe that something enormous lived beneath the waves. Whales and sharks were known, yes, but this was something else. Bigger, smarter, silent. Mariners' logs from the 1600s and 1700s are filled with vague but chilling entries. Unnatural disturbance. Vessel struck by unseen force. Crew reports tentacle or serpent sighting. These were not tales told by poets or dreamers, but by working men whose lives depended on knowing the sea. One story spoke of a merchant ship traveling near Iceland, its captain known for being steady and skeptical. He wrote in his journal that the sea around the ship had turned thick and living, as if the water itself were breathing. Then the bow lifted sharply, and he saw, just for a moment, something dark and round rise from beneath, like the curve of an island. He thought it was a whale, until he saw the eyes. They glowed faintly, reflecting the moonlight. The ship survived that encounter, but only barely. The crew claimed that after the creature dove, a whirlpool formed, pulling at them for hours before it finally released its grip. The men spoke of it for the rest of their lives. Of course, skeptics later said it was nonsense, that it was just a storm surge, or the effect of colliding currents. But to the men who lived through it, that didn't matter. They had seen something, and in their minds only one word fit: Kraken. The stories spread like ripples on the water. In port towns from Bergen to Reykjavik, every sailor knew someone who had vanished at sea. The details changed, but the feeling remained, that the ocean could reach up and take you whenever it pleased. Even the strongest ships were no match for the sea's power, and when a wreck was found later, crushed timbers, missing masts, torn sails, it was easy to imagine that something with arms thicker than trees had wrapped around it and dragged it down. In those times, people didn't have sonar or deep-sea cameras. They didn't know that the ocean floor was home to mountains, canyons, and creatures stranger than anything they could imagine. To them, the sea was bottomless, an infinite world of shadows. So when ships disappeared, it wasn't unreasonable to think something was down there, waiting. Even the most practical sailors sometimes gave in to superstition. Before setting sail, some would toss a coin into the water, an offering to whatever ruled beneath. Others carried charms carved from whalebone, said to keep the Kraken away. Some captains even forbade whistling aboard, believing it might call the deep. But despite their fear, they kept sailing. Because that's what humans do, we keep crossing the unknown, even when we know it might destroy us. And that is why the Kraken endured, because it wasn't just a story. It was a reflection of the sea itself, unpredictable, powerful, and impossible to fully understand. By the 18th century, reports of vanished ships filled European newspapers. The public was fascinated and horrified in equal measure. Articles spoke of monstrous tentacles and ships devoured by the deep. Illustrators drew scenes of wooden vessels breaking apart under the grip of colossal arms, the waves boiling with foam and terror. It became entertainment. But for those who actually sailed, it wasn't fiction. It was warning. A British whaler once reported seeing something vast and round, breaking the surface with such force that waves washed across the deck. Another account told of arms rising like smoke, lashing at the rigging before vanishing into the dark. Most of these encounters happened in fog, when the horizon vanished and the world felt small, surrounded by whispering water. And that might be the most unsettling truth of all. In the fog, even the smallest ripple can look like the rise of something massive. The sea plays tricks on the eyes. It bends sound, distorts light, and turns the ordinary into the uncanny. So when ships disappeared, and they often did, it wasn't just the ocean swallowing them. It was imagination, too. The Kraken was a story born from absence, from what was left behind. No bodies, no wreck, just fear and the endless blue. But sometimes the ocean returned pieces, barrels floating for weeks, bits of wood scarred with circular marks, nets torn apart, whale bones scarred with strange sucker-like patterns. Every fragment seemed like a clue, like the sea was teasing the truth, giving humanity just enough to believe. And so the legend grew, stronger than ever, fed not by proof, but by mystery. Because if the sea could hide ships forever, what else could it hide? The question lingered in every port, every harbor, every restless dream of the men who sailed beyond sight of land. Perhaps that's why even now when a ship vanishes or a submarine goes silent, our minds still wander to the same ancient thought, that something waits down there moving slowly through the dark just beyond what light can reach. And maybe that whisper beneath the waves never really went away. Long before photographs, before sonar and underwater cameras, stories of the sea were captured with ink and paint. And when it came to the Kraken, artists had only rumors and fear to guide them. The earliest drawings weren't made by scientists, but by sailors, explorers, and mapmakers, people who had never seen the creature themselves, yet were surrounded by those who swore they had. With no proof, they turned to imagination, and imagination, when mixed with fear, can be powerful. On the oldest maps of the world, those drawn in the 1500s and 1600s, the oceans were not empty blue. They were filled with monsters. Great serpents coiled through the waves, whales with teeth the size of ships devoured men whole, and on the edges of those maps were words written in careful ink. Here be dragons. Somewhere among them, the Kraken began to appear. Artists drew it rising from the water, a mountain of flesh and arms, curling around ships that looked tiny in comparison. They didn't care much for accuracy. This was art, not evidence. But every drawing added something new. A different shape, a different texture, a new fear. In some sketches, the Kraken looked like an octopus. Its arms long and sinuous, its eyes enormous and unblinking. In others, it resembled a giant crab, its shell jagged like volcanic rock. A few even imagined it as a hybrid, half fish, half serpent, with wings like fins and teeth that shimmered like pearls. What's interesting is how these drawings changed over time. Early on, the Kraken was depicted as a creature of myth, something between a god and a nightmare. But as exploration expanded and natural history became a science, artists began trying to make it believable. You can almost trace humanity's curiosity through these images. In medieval times, the Kraken was pure chaos, a symbol of nature's wrath. But by the 18th century, artists tried to make sense of it. They drew diagrams, measurements, and notes in the margins. Observed off the coast of Norway. Said to drag down full ships. Eyes like lanterns in the deep. These weren't just drawings, they were acts of wonder, attempts to understand something vast and hidden, long before we had the tools to see it. Imagine a candlelit study in 1750, a scholar bent over a parchment, sketching the outline of an enormous creature described in a letter from a sailor. He has never seen it, but he believes it exists. He shades the eyes carefully, gives it long curling arms, and writes beneath the image, "The Kraken, known to the Norse, perhaps of the family of the polypus." That's what belief looked like before science could catch up. Quiet, detailed, and full of awe. But drawings also did something else. They made the legend real to those who had never gone to sea. Townsfolk who lived far from the coast could now look at those images and imagine what waited beyond the horizon. The Kraken became part of human imagination, no longer confined to the northern oceans. By the 1800s, as printing spread across Europe, images of the Kraken appeared in newspapers and books. Some were used to decorate maps, others to sell adventure stories. Illustrations showed entire ships being dragged under, sailors screaming, masts splintering. It was terrifying, yes, but beautiful too. And in those drawings, the Kraken began to evolve from a myth to a mystery. When people looked at those images, they didn't just see a monster, they saw the unknown. A reminder that the world was still full of things unseen, that the sea held secrets no one could quite explain. Even now, centuries later, those old engravings still feel powerful. They're not realistic by modern standards, but there's something haunting about them. The artists didn't know what a giant squid looked like. They didn't know that such creatures actually existed. And yet, somehow, their guesses weren't far off. The large, circular eyes, the curling arms, the way it seemed to rise from the deep, massive but graceful. When scientists finally discovered giant squids centuries later, it was almost as if the artists had seen the future. Or perhaps they had simply listened closely to the ocean's stories. It's easy to forget that before photography, imagination was the only way to explore what couldn't be seen. Each drawing was a voyage, an attempt to bring the unreachable into light. And so, the Kraken lived on paper long before it was ever found in truth. There's something strangely comforting about that humans, even in fear, still tried to understand. They didn't just scream at the unknown. They drew it, named it, studied it. In a way, that's what defines us. We turn mystery into art. Today, we can dive miles below the surface with cameras and drones. We can see the real giants, the colossal squids that drift silently through the dark. But the Kraken on old maps still has something that modern science doesn't to capture. A soul, a story, a sense of wonder that refuses to die. When you look at those ancient drawings, you can almost feel what it must have been like to be alive in that time. Standing at the edge of knowledge, staring into an ocean that seemed endless and believing that anything might rise from it. And maybe that's why, even now when someone mentions the Kraken, our minds don't think of squid DNA or biology. We think of the image, the curling arms, the dark water, the ship swallowed whole. The drawing has outlived the fact. It's proof that sometimes art doesn't just record history, it creates it. Because in the end, the Kraken wasn't born in the deep sea. It was born in human imagination. Ink by ink, fear by fear, wave by wave, and that's how a myth becomes immortal. By the 1800s, the world was changing fast. Steamships crossed oceans. Telegraph wires carried messages across continents. Science was beginning to explain what once seemed like magic. But even as people explored, mapped, and measured the world, there was still one place that refused to be fully known: the sea. It was too deep, too dark, too vast, and that mystery fed an obsession. The 19th century became an age of discovery and disbelief all at once. On land, explorers climbed mountains and reached new continents. But at sea, myths refused to die. Every strange ripple, every shape seen in the fog, every shadow that brushed against a ship's hull became potential proof that monsters still lurked below. And the Kraken, once a legend of the North, became the face of that obsession. Newspapers loved stories of the unexplained. They filled columns with dramatic headlines: monster seen off the coast, giant creature attacks ship, fishermen terrified by sea serpent. The stories were often exaggerated or even invented, but readers didn't care. They wanted to believe that somewhere out there, the ocean still held creatures from the dawn of time. Illustrations accompanied these reports: great curling tentacles rising from the waves, huge eyes glowing beneath the surface, ships tossed about like toys. People bought the papers eagerly, spreading the legends even further. In a world growing smaller through exploration, the sea became humanity's last frontier of wonder. And the Kraken, in many ways, was its guardian. But it wasn't all fantasy. Sometimes the ocean offered just enough evidence to make people question their skepticism. In 1857, a Danish naturalist named Japetus Steenstrup studied strange beak-like remains found inside the stomachs of sperm whales. They were enormous, far too large to belong to any known squid. His findings led to the classification of Architeuthis ducks, the giant squid. Suddenly, the idea of a Kraken didn't seem so ridiculous anymore. A few years later, in 1873, fishermen off the coast of Newfoundland hauled up pieces of what looked like a giant tentacle. The specimen measured several feet long, lined with suction cups the size of coins. Newspapers printed the story everywhere. People marveled. Maybe, at last, the Kraken was real. Still, no one had ever seen a live one. But the ocean has a way of giving hints. Throughout the late 1800s, carcasses and tentacles washed up along the shores of Newfoundland, New Zealand, and Norway. Some were decayed, some incomplete, but all enormous. Their discovery sent waves of excitement through scientific communities and ordinary people alike. Even Jules Verne, the famous French author, was inspired by the idea. In his 1870 novel 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, he wrote of a colossal squid attacking Captain Nemo's submarine, its arms like living cables, and its eyes glowing with a phosphorescent light. The story captured readers everywhere, a perfect blend of science, imagination, and the lingering shadow of myth. From then on, the Kraken was no longer just a sailor's ghost story. It became a cultural symbol, a creature that represented the thin line between discovery and fear. Museums began displaying drawings and preserved squid parts in glass cases. Scientists debated whether the creatures were aggressive or shy. Some speculated they might live in deep trenches, far below the reach of sunlight. Others argued they might still hunt whales, just as the old legends said. People were fascinated by the idea that the ocean could hide something so massive, something ancient, intelligent, and unseen. It is strange to think that while cities were being lit by electricity and trains were shrinking distances, the sea remained as mysterious as ever. Beneath all that progress, humanity's oldest fear still lived quietly in the dark. And perhaps that's why the sea monster craze burned so brightly, because it reminded people that even with all their knowledge, there were still places they could not conquer. There's a certain comfort in that, isn't there? The idea that the world still has corners beyond our reach, places where myths can breathe. By the end of the 19th century, explorers were mapping the deep ocean with new tools. Deep-sea dredges brought up strange creatures, fish with glowing bodies, eels with jaws like traps, and jellyfish that pulsed with light. Each discovery made the Kraken seem a little less impossible. It wasn't that people still believed in a monster dragging ships under the waves. It was that they realized how little they truly knew about what lived below. And in that realization, the Kraken found new life, not as a beast to fear, but as a symbol of the unknown. It represented the human instinct to keep searching, even when we don't have all the answers. The curiosity that drives us to look into the dark, to imagine what might be there. So, while the newspapers moved on to other stories about machines, wars, and inventions, the Kraken lingered. It stayed in books, in art, in whispers told to children staring out at the horizon. Because no matter how much science explained, one truth remained. The ocean still held more secrets than the land ever would, and maybe, just maybe, somewhere in that vast blue silence, something ancient still stirs. Not a monster, but a reminder that wonder, like the sea, never truly ends. The deeper you go beneath the waves, the quieter the world becomes. The sunlight fades, the colors vanish, and sound itself turns strange, muffled, distant, as if the sea is breathing in slow motion. It's hard for us to imagine just how vast and silent the ocean truly is. Even today, with all our technology, we've explored only a fraction of it. But centuries ago, before submarines, before sonar, people could only guess what lay below. And in that endless darkness, imagination filled the gaps. When sailors spoke of the Kraken, they weren't just talking about a creature. They were giving shape to the unknown, to the feeling that something immense was watching from below, something far older and more powerful than humankind. Even now, when you look at a map of the ocean floor, it's humbling. Mountains taller than Everest rise beneath the waves. Canyons deeper than the Grand Canyon cut through the seabed. There are volcanoes, lakes of brine, and entire ecosystems that thrive in eternal night. It's a world as alien as any other planet. And for most of human history, no one had ever seen it. In the 19th century, a handful of scientists began to wonder if the ocean floor might not be as empty as people thought. Some believed strange creatures could survive there, living in the crushing dark. Others dismissed the idea. They thought life couldn't exist without sunlight. Then, in the 1870s, the HMS Challenger set sail, the first true deep-sea research expedition. It spent 4 years traveling the world, collecting samples and measuring depths that no human had ever dared to study. What they found changed everything. There were creatures living miles below the surface, delicate, glowing, perfectly adapted to the dark. There were worms, jellyfish, and fish with luminous organs that glowed like stars. The sea, it turned out, was not dead. It was alive, mysterious, and vast beyond comprehension. For many, the discoveries only deepened the mystery of the Kraken. Because if strange life could exist in the deepest darkness, who was to say that something larger couldn't? The scientists of the time had mixed feelings. They wanted to believe in logic, in what could be measured. But some quietly admitted that the sea might still hold surprises. There was so much they didn't know, and in that uncertainty, the legend still breathed. It's fascinating to think that as humanity learned more, we didn't lose our sense of wonder. We simply redirected it. The Kraken began to shift in meaning, no longer a monster of terror, but a symbol of the deep unknown. It became the face of mystery itself. Writers, philosophers, and artists began to see the ocean differently. No longer just a graveyard of ships, but a place of origin, the cradle of life, the realm of secrets too vast for human minds to grasp. The Kraken became less of a destroyer and more of a guardian, a keeper of the world's oldest stories. Even today, when you watch the deep-sea footage captured by submersibles, it feels otherworldly. Strange, translucent creatures drift past the cameras, glowing softly in the dark. Some look like ribbons of light, others resemble ghosts or liquid glass. They seem delicate, yet they've survived pressures that would crush steel. It's not hard to imagine that deep down, in that black silence, something ancient still moves slowly through the water, something that doesn't care about human time or science or fear, something that has been there since before we existed, and that is the quiet truth of the deep. The ocean is still the one place where myth and reality overlap. You can't look into its depths without feeling both awe and unease. When scientists first used sonar in the early 20th century, they detected strange echoes from the deep, massive, shifting patterns that didn't match any known geological feature. Some thought they had found new underwater mountains. Others whispered that maybe, just maybe, they were detecting movement, something alive. The readings were eventually explained as layers of plankton and fish, but the idea that the sea could hide something vast remained. Even with all our progress, the deep ocean remains largely unseen. We've mapped the surface of Mars more accurately than the ocean floor, and that means there's still room for mystery. There's still room for something like the Kraken to exist, not necessarily as a monster, but as a reminder that our planet still keeps secrets. The deep ocean humbles us. It's a mirror that reflects how small we truly are, how much we still don't understand, and maybe that is why stories like the Kraken in us endure, because they speak to that quiet, ancient part of us that wonders what's waiting just out of sight. Somewhere below the waves, in the cold and the dark, life continues unseen. Strange creatures glide through the water, glowing faintly, whispering through a world without light. And maybe, if we could listen closely enough, we'd hear the echo of something enormous moving far beneath, not in anger, not in hunger, but simply existing, as it has for millions of years. Not a monster, not a myth, just the ocean remembering its oldest dream. By the early 20th century, curiosity about the ocean had turned from superstition into science. Humanity had begun to dig beneath the surface, both literally and figuratively, to uncover what really lived in the depths that had terrified sailors for thousands of years. Ships no longer carried only cargo or explorers, they carried scientists. Men and women with notebooks, microscopes, and instruments designed to measure, record, and understand what once had no name. They dropped nets, cameras, and probes into the dark, bringing back fragments of a hidden world that few could have imagined. But even as the tools improved, the mystery didn't fade. It only grew. When the first deep-sea photographs were taken in the early 1900s, people were stunned. The images were grainy and ghost-like, showing faint outlines of fish with enormous eyes, translucent bodies, and sharp, glimmering teeth. These weren't monsters, but they were undeniably strange. They looked like creatures from dreams or nightmares. As more discoveries came in, one truth became clear. The ocean was far stranger and far more alien than anyone had ever guessed. In the 1920s and 1930s, oceanographers began retrieving tentacles and beaks that matched the size and shape of those described centuries earlier. Some were nearly 30 feet long. These remains confirmed what old sailors had whispered about, the existence of Architeuthis ducks, the giant squid. It wasn't just a legend anymore. The Kraken was real. Of course, science gave it a new name and a new place in the natural world. But that didn't make it any less incredible. To think that such creatures, long, sleek, and powerful, had been living beneath the waves all this time was both thrilling and humbling. Researchers studied how these squids might live at depths where sunlight never reaches, where pressure could crush a human submarine, and yet they thrived. They hunted silently, their tentacles lined with suction cups ringed by tiny hooks. Some whales even bore scars from their battles with these enormous animals. Suction marks the size of dinner plates. It was evidence written on flesh, a record of encounters between titans. But if the giant squid was impressive, the next discovery was even more astonishing. In the 2000s, scientists confirmed the existence of the colossal squid, a species even larger, with eyes the size of basketballs, and hooks on its arms that could twist and lock into prey. It was as if nature had looked at our legends and said, "You weren't exaggerating enough." For the first time in history, humans could look directly into the eyes of the creatures that had inspired so many myths. And yet, standing in front of one in a museum tank, preserved in cold blue light, people didn't feel fear. They felt awe. The Kraken was no longer a monster to be hunted. It had become a marvel to be studied, a reminder of how much the world still hides beneath its surface. Modern scientists now use remotely operated vehicles, deep-sea cameras, and sonar to explore parts of the ocean once thought unreachable. They filmed giant squids alive, gliding through the dark with an eerie grace. They've discovered new species, fish that create their own light, jellyfish that change color like living lanterns, and creatures so fragile that they dissolve when brought to the surface. And still, the deep remains full of questions. Every answer brings more mysteries. There are vast trenches deeper than Mount Everest is tall, filled with ecosystems we barely understand. There are sounds detected by sonar that no one can identify. Massive, rhythmic vibrations echoing through the water, recorded but unexplained. Even now, scientists estimate that we've identified less than 10% of marine life. The rest, millions of possible species, remain unknown. It's almost poetic, isn't it? That after centuries of searching for monsters, we found instead a living cathedral of strangeness and beauty. The Kraken, as a myth, may have faded from fearsome reality, but in another way, it was right all along. The ocean is full of giants. They just aren't here to drag ships down. They here to remind us how small we are. And maybe that's why, even in the age of satellites and submarines, the ocean still has that quiet pull, the sense that beneath the blue expanse lies a world untouched, unmeasured, unconquered. Science has given us facts, but mystery, somehow, remains. It's hard not to feel it when you look at the deep, the hum of the unknown, the call of something ancient and vast, older than our species, older even than our myths. Perhaps that's the real truth the Kraken was trying to tell us all along, that the world will always be bigger, deeper, and stranger than our imagination. And that, sometimes, wonder is the most scientific feeling of all. Even after science pulled the Kraken from the depths of myth and placed it neatly among real creatures, the legend refused to fade away. It lingered, drifting from the mouths of sailors to the pages of books, from songs whispered in taverns to the bright screens of our modern world. It's funny, really. The more we explained it, the more we seemed to love it. There's something about the Kraken that feels timeless. Maybe it's because it speaks to a fear buried deep in all of us, the fear of the unknown. The vastness of the ocean mirrors the vastness of our imagination. When you look out over a dark, endless sea, part of you still wonders what's down there. Something primal stirs, just like it did for those sailors hundreds of years ago. In the centuries since, the Kraken has become a symbol that keeps reinventing itself. In literature, it became a metaphor for power and mystery. Alfred, Lord Tennyson's famous poem The Kraken, described it as a sleeping giant beneath the waves, waiting in ancient, dreamless, uninvaded sleep. It wasn't evil. It was eternal, silent, waiting. His version of the Kraken was more like a god than a monster. Then, in the 20th century, the creature came roaring back to life through art, film, and stories. When Hollywood rediscovered it, the Kraken took on new shapes, bigger, brighter, more dramatic, but always familiar. In Clash of the Titans, it wasn't a deep-sea giant anymore. It was a weapon of the gods, a creature to be unleashed, a reminder that even heroes tremble before nature's fury. But even as the Kraken changed, the feeling stayed the same. It was never just about tentacles or size. It was about awe, the human fascination with what lies beyond the edge of what we know. In paintings and music, the Kraken became a symbol of chaos and creation, destruction and rebirth. It appeared in heavy metal songs, video games, novels, and even logos for sports teams and coffee brands. Somehow, a creature born from fear became a mark of strength, mystery, and endurance. It's amazing to think that a story born from sailors in wooden ships now travels through satellites and fiber-optic cables, reaching millions of screens around the world. The myth has adapted just like the creatures that inspired it. But there's a quieter truth behind it all. Legends survive not because they're real, but because they say something true about us. The Kraken reminds us of our smallness, of the things we can't control, of the beauty and terror of the unknown. It's a mirror we hold up to our curiosity and our humility. Even scientists, in their quiet moments, admit this. When researchers talk about exploring the deep, they often describe a feeling that's not purely scientific. It's reverent, as if the ocean itself is sacred, as if looking into the abyss feels like touching something eternal. The Kraken is the shape of that feeling. When you think about it, myths never really die. They evolve. They shift like the sea itself, sometimes calm, sometimes wild, always changing form but never disappearing. Every generation reimagines them, breathing new life into old waters. Somewhere in the rhythm of waves, in the whisper of tides, you can still hear it, the pulse of an ancient story, a creature that refuses to be forgotten. It doesn't matter that we've mapped the ocean floors or filmed giant squids on camera, because the Kraken was never just a creature. It was a question, a mystery dressed as a monster, and questions never die. They wait, quietly, patiently, just beneath the surface. Even now, when the ocean is calm and moonlight spreads across its surface, it's easy to understand why the old tales survived. The sea feels alive. The dark water seems to breathe. You can almost believe something vast and unseen moves below, not in menace, but in eternal rhythm with the world. Maybe that's what the ancient sailors felt, the deep heartbeat of the planet itself. The same one we still feel, even if we don't have the words for it. The Kraken endures because we still need it, because in a world where everything seems known, it reminds us that mystery still exists, that some questions are too beautiful to answer, and maybe that is what keeps the legend alive, our quiet hope that there's always something more, just beyond what we can see. When people first imagined the Kraken, they saw it as a single monstrous being, something unique, almost supernatural. But as science ventured deeper into the ocean, it became clear that the sea doesn't need imagination to create monsters. It already does that on its own. Down where sunlight fades to black, life takes strange and breathtaking forms. Every creature is a survivor, shaped by pressure, cold, and time. The result is a world that feels both alien and ancient, a living museum of evolution's wildest ideas. Imagine drifting through that darkness. The water grows cold and heavy. The light from above is gone, and then something glows ahead, a pulse of green, a ribbon of blue, a flash of red. It's life announcing itself in the most silent place on Earth. Bioluminescence, the ability to make light in total darkness, is one of nature's greatest wonders. Fish, jellyfish, squid, even bacteria shimmer and flicker like underwater stars. Some use it to lure prey, others to hide from predators. It's beautiful and eerie, like drifting through a galaxy beneath the waves, and among them are giants. The giant squid, Architeuthis dux, once the source of sailor nightmares, is very real. Stretching up to 40 feet long, it moves with an almost ghostly grace, its arms floating like silk ribbons in the water. Its eyes, each the size of a human head, can detect faint traces of light, allowing it to see what most creatures cannot. But even the giant squid has rivals. The colossal squid, discovered in the icy depths of Antarctica, is thicker, heavier, and possibly more formidable. Its tentacles are armed with rotating hooks instead of simple suckers. Its body is built not for speed, but for power. A slow-moving hunter that may ambush prey in the black cold of the Southern Ocean. No one has ever seen a living colossal squid in its natural habitat, but the few we've captured or photographed are enough to remind us that nature still keeps secrets. And then there are the deep-sea fish. Creatures so strange they seem like dreams gone wrong. There's the anglerfish, a small but terrifying predator that dangles a glowing lure above its mouth, tricking prey into swimming close enough to be swallowed whole. Its teeth curve inward, ensuring that once something goes in, it never comes back out. There's the gulper eel, with a mouth so large it can swallow things twice its size. The dragonfish, with transparent teeth. The blobfish, whose jelly-like form collapses under pressure when brought to the surface. And, deeper still, there are things we barely have names for. Slithering shadows captured by cameras for only a few seconds before vanishing into the black. It's easy to see how ancient sailors, seeing glimpses of these creatures, or their remains, believed they were encountering monsters. Because in truth, they were. Just not the kind from myth books or nightmares. They were seeing evolution's imagination at work. Every fin, every light, every translucent scale was designed by millions of years of survival in conditions we can hardly comprehend. Down there, pressure can crush steel. Temperatures hover near freezing. Yet somehow, life thrives. When scientists send remote cameras down into these depths, what they record often defies explanation. Creatures appear that look like living smoke or ribbons made of light. Others seem almost artificial, as if sculpted from glass. Some move so slowly that a single flick of a fin can take a full minute. The abyss is quiet, but not empty. It's alive in ways we still barely understand. And maybe that's why we keep telling stories about monsters, because even though we can now name them, giant squid, anglerfish, jellyfish, eel, they still remind us how little we truly know. The Kraken, in many ways, was the human mind's way of preparing for this reality. We needed a name for the awe we felt when faced with something immense and unknowable. So we invented one. But now, standing on the edge of discovery, we realize that nature's creations don't need exaggeration. They are already more astonishing than anything we could dream up. It's humbling to know that these creatures live their entire lives in total darkness, without ever seeing the sun. They eat, hunt, and reproduce in a world where sight hardly matters. A world ruled by patience, silence, and instinct. And yet, somehow, they're connected to us. We share the same planet, breathe the same water cycle, live under the same stars. They remind us that Earth is far deeper and more complex than what we see on the surface. Perhaps the real monsters of the abyss aren't monsters at all. They're reminders, symbols of the untamed beauty of our world. When you close your eyes and picture the Kraken now, maybe you don't need to imagine it as a single creature. Maybe it's the sum of all these beings. 1,000 lives intertwined in the deep, ancient rhythm of the ocean. The Kraken, then, is not one monster. It's the spirit of the sea itself, the pulse of mystery, the breath of the unknown, the whisper that calls us back to wonder. Because in the end, it's not about finding the monster. It's about realizing we never stopped living among them. Even now, in an age of satellites and submarines, the ocean still feels unknowable. We can cross continents in hours, send probes to Mars, and map the entire Earth from space, yet the deep sea remains a shadow we can quite touch. And maybe that's why it scares us. The fear of deep water runs through us like an instinct older than memory. It's not just about drowning or the dark. It's about what might be there, beneath the surface, unseen, silent, patient. The same fear that once whispered to sailors still lingers in us today. When you stand at the edge of the sea at night, staring into black waves that vanish into the horizon, it's easy to feel it. That strange mix of awe and unease. The realization that the world beneath those waves is not ours. It never was. The ocean doesn't behave the way we expect it to. It doesn't care about boundaries or light or sound. It's vast enough to swallow anything, even knowledge, and somewhere deep in our minds, we understand that. For ancient sailors, this fear was survival. The ocean was their sky, their wilderness, their home, and their grave. When storms rolled in, or the sea went still, when something massive brushed against the hull, they didn't have science to explain it. They had instinct. They had stories. The Kraken was one of those stories, a shape given to fear. You can almost picture it. A sailor staring into the water, his lantern swaying with the motion of the ship, the light glinting off something that shouldn't be there. A shape too large, a movement too smooth. He grips the railing and feels the heartbeat of the ocean below. His mind fills the darkness with imagination. Maybe that S, where all fear begins, in the space between what we know and what we can see. Even now, psychologists say that fear of the deep isn't irrational. It's called thalassophobia, and it's one of humanity's most common and ancient anxieties. The fear of vast, deep bodies of water. The fear of what lies beneath. It's an echo of survival. A memory passed down through time, reminding us that not everything in the dark means safety. When divers go down far enough, they describe a moment when the world seems to vanish. There's no up or down, no light, no sound except for the slow hiss of their own breath. The pressure grows heavy. Their pulse slows. It's beautiful and terrifying. In that silence, imagination returns. It's easy to believe something enormous is nearby, watching. And maybe that's not just fear. Maybe it's humility. A reminder that there are places where human power ends. The Kraken, in that sense, isn't just a monster of the sea. It's the embodiment of that primal realization that the universe, the earth, the ocean, are all larger and stranger than we are. The sea humbles us. It reminds us that we are guests here, walking on a thin surface of light above a world that does not belong to us. Even today, with all our knowledge, we still dream of what could be hiding below. Not because we want to conquer it, but because we need to imagine it. The unknown calls to something deep in the human spirit. The same thing that drives us to explore space, to dig into ancient tombs, to ask questions with no answers. The deep sea holds the same allure. It's the last true wilderness, untouched, immense, alive. Every myth ever told about the ocean, every siren, every serpent, every kraken, was really about that longing to understand what we can't. It's not just fear, it's fascination. When we imagine the Kraken rising from the dark, it's not just a monster emerging. It's our own curiosity breaking the surface. Wild, unpredictable, unstoppable. The fear of depth isn't something to overcome. It's something to respect. It keeps us cautious, yes, but it also keeps us wondering. Because maybe, deep down, we know the truth. Fear and wonder are two sides of the same feeling. One makes us tremble. The other makes us dream. But both remind us we're alive in a universe that's still mysterious. And as long as there are places where light cannot reach, the fear and the beauty of the deep will never fade. The Kraken may not wait below us anymore, but its shadow lives on in our hearts. Every time we look out across the open sea, every time we stare into darkness and imagine something vast moving there, we're keeping that ancient story alive. Not out of terror, but out of reverence. Because maybe, when the sea feels endless, it's not warning us, it's whispering. There is still more to discover. In a way, the Kraken never really sank. It just changed waters. From the roaring seas of the old world, it swam quietly into our modern imagination, into movies, stories, symbols, and even everyday life. It went from myth to metaphor, from fear to fascination, and maybe that's why it still feels so alive today. In the old days, people whispered about it in the flickering light of lanterns. Now, we summon it with the glow of a screen. The Kraken has become one of those rare creatures that belongs to everyone. A piece of shared mythology that travels easily between fact and fiction. When you see it today, it's not always a monster. Sometimes it's a guardian, a mystery, or even a brand. The creature once blamed for sinking ships now sells coffee, appears in music videos, and roars through blockbuster films. But even under all the modern lights, the heart of the Kraken hasn't changed. It is still about the same feeling, that mix of awe and fear toward what lies beyond reach. When Clash of the Titans first shouted, "Release the Kraken!" to audiences in 1981, it reignited a fascination that's lasted for decades. The phrase became famous, but what made it powerful wasn't the monster itself. It was the idea of something unstoppable, ancient and vast being unleashed, a symbol of power and mystery, all at once. From there, the Kraken slipped easily into every corner of storytelling. It appeared in fantasy novels, video games, and even scientific documentaries. Sometimes as a villain, sometimes as a force of nature, sometimes as a reminder of how small humans are in the face of the world's enormity. Artists began painting it again, not as a horror, but as beauty. Twisting tentacles wrapping around ships or curling gracefully through deep blue water. The Kraken became a muse for imagination, for anyone who loved the ocean and its endless unknowns. Even scientists, in their own quiet way, kept the myth alive. They began naming real creatures after it, deep-sea species with long limbs or strange forms. Each discovery seemed to echo the old stories, as if the legend was waiting patiently to be proven right in pieces. And there's something poetic in that. Every time a submersible camera captures a giant squid gliding through the dark, it feels like we're seeing the Kraken again. Not as a monster, but as a living memory, a myth that turned out to have a pulse. But the modern Kraken isn't just about the ocean anymore. It's become a symbol of our relationship with mystery itself. In a world where we carry the internet in our pockets, where maps show every inch of land, and satellites watch from above, there's something comforting about knowing the ocean still keeps secrets. The Kraken represents that last piece of the unknown, a quiet reminder that not everything can be explained or captured. People wear it on shirts, print it on posters, and tattoo it on their skin. For some, it means strength, the idea of being unshakable, powerful, untamed. For others, it means mystery, the beauty of not needing to understand everything. Even in psychology and literature, the Kraken appears as a metaphor for hidden emotions, for the subconscious, for the deep parts of ourselves we rarely explore. the dark water inside every human heart where old fears and forgotten dreams still drift. It's amazing how one creature, born from sailors' fear and imagination, could survive for centuries, transform through cultures, and still find meaning today. That's what true myths do. They adapt, they breathe, they grow with us. In truth, the modern Kraken doesn't belong to the ocean anymore. It belongs to the human spirit, the part of us that looks into the unknown and refuses to stop wondering. And when we see those curling tentacles in art or film, when we hear the phrase, "Release the Kraken," shouted in excitement or humor, something deep within us stirs. A recognition. A whisper of the same feeling that once gripped sailors staring into black waves. It's not fear anymore. It's fascination. The modern Kraken lives on not because it terrifies us, but because it connects us to history, to imagination, and to the timeless mystery of the deep. It reminds us that the world, no matter how well we think we know it, will always have shadows beyond the light. And in those shadows, something ancient and wonderful still moves. Maybe the real secret is this: the Kraken didn't vanish. It just found a new ocean, the vast, boundless sea of the human imagination. And in that ocean, it will never die. If you sit by the ocean long enough, something happens. The sound of the waves begins to match your heartbeat. The air feels different. The world slows down. And in that stillness, you start to sense what ancient people must have felt. A quiet awareness that the sea is older than anything we know. It has always been there, patient and alive, watching continents drift, species rise and vanish, empires come and go. Through all of it, the sea remains, unmoved, eternal, carrying secrets so old they don't even have names anymore. When we look at the ocean today, it's easy to forget how deep it truly goes. Beneath the sparkling surface, there are mountains taller than Everest and trenches deeper than our highest skies. There are valleys where light has never touched, where pressure would crush any human-made machine, and yet life still thrives. It's a world of endless twilight, a place beyond our senses. Down there, everything moves slowly. Fish drift like ghosts. The temperature never changes. The water is heavy, thick with silence. And it feels timeless, as if the ocean has never cared about the ticking of clocks or the rise and fall of civilizations above. It's humbling to imagine that this vast, unseen world exists beneath every coastline we know. It doesn't shout or demand attention. It simply is. Quiet, infinite, alive. When we speak of the Kraken, or any of the monsters humans once imagined, we are really speaking of our own yearning to understand that deep silence, to give it a face, a name, a story, because the unknown is easier to face when it feels like something we can picture. But maybe, as we've learned, the ocean doesn't need monsters to be extraordinary. It already is. In the deepest parts of the sea, even light gives up. Only life remains, glowing, slow, graceful, ancient. The creatures there are not horrifying. They are miracles of adaptation, proof that life in its quiet persistence can thrive anywhere. When we finally sent cameras into the deep, what we found wasn't a nightmare. It was a revelation. Tiny sparks of light drifting like stars. Strange, elegant shapes, moving as though time itself had slowed for them. It was peaceful. It was beautiful. It was endless. The deeper we looked, the more we realized that the sea isn't T-dark because it S-empty. It S-dark because it S-full. Too full for light to ever reach every corner. That's what makes it eternal. For every creature we've discovered, there are likely hundreds more waiting in the dark, unseen, unnamed, untouched. Perhaps even now, as you listen, a new life form drifts somewhere far below the waves, unnoticed by the world above. And that's the quiet magic of the ocean. It's always creating, always changing, always hiding something new. Humans have explored mountains, deserts, even the moon. But the sea remains our greatest mystery. We've mapped its surface, but not its soul. And maybe that's how it should be. Maybe some mysteries are meant to stay quiet, to remind us that not everything needs to be solved. Because in a way, the ocean isn't just water, it's memory. It holds the story of life itself, from its very beginning. Every drop has witnessed something. Every wave carries echoes of the past, whispers of the first creatures that ever lived. And maybe that's what makes the legend of the Kraken so powerful. It's not just a tale of terror, it's a story of awe, of standing before something so vast that it makes you feel small, yet connected. When sailors spoke of the Kraken rising from the depths, they weren't only describing fear, they were describing the feeling of facing infinity. The truth is, the ocean has never stopped being infinite. Even as we send machines to explore it, even as we name new species and measure the trenches, it remains unknowable in spirit. A world apart. A realm of silence and shadow. And maybe that's why people keep returning to it. Artists, scientists, dreamers. Because somewhere deep inside, we all crave that mystery. We need to know that there are still places left where the light doesn't reach. Places that remind us we haven't seen it all. The endless deep isn't something to fear. It's something to listen to. Something that humbles us, soothes us, and teaches us patience. In its silence, there's wisdom. And perhaps that's the final truth. The Kraken, the monsters, the myths, they were all our way of speaking to that silence. Our way of giving shape to the vastness that language could never fully hold. But when you stand on the shore, feeling the pull of the tide and the weight of the sea breeze, you realize something simple. The ocean doesn't need to speak. It already says everything, in waves, in whispers, in the endless rhythm of its own breathing. We just have to be quiet enough to listen. If you listen closely to the ocean at night, it almost sounds like it's breathing. Slow, deep, endless. Waves rise and fall like the chest of something alive, something ancient, something that has seen more than time itself could ever remember. And maybe that's what the ocean really is. The memory of the world. Long before humans walked the earth, before mountains were shaped and continents found their form, the ocean was already there. It watched the first creatures crawl from its depths. It held the first storms, the first lightning, the first whispers of life. Every sound, every current, every ripple carries a trace of everything that has ever been. And if the sea remembers, then so do its stories. The Kraken, the Leviathans, the great unseen creatures, they are not just tales of fear or fantasy. They are echoes of human wonder, passed down like songs. The ocean didn't give us those stories. We gave them to the ocean, and it kept them, as it keeps everything. Softly, patiently, forever. When you think of it that way, the sea becomes a mirror, not of light, but of memory. It reflects our courage, our curiosity, our fear, our longing. Every story told about it reveals something about us, how we see mystery, how we chase the unknown, and how, deep down, we've always needed something vast to remind us we're small. Because the truth is, the ocean humbles everyone. It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, or what you believe. When you stand before it, you feel the same pull, the same quiet awe. It's the one thing that reminds us without words that we are part of something larger, something eternal. Maybe that's why people still go to the sea when they're lost, or tired, or searching for peace. They sit on the sand, watching the waves come and go, and somehow it feels like the world is still in rhythm. The same waves that touch the feet of ancient sailors now touch ours. The same stars that watched over them still shine above us. Time changes everything, but not the ocean's song. And in that song, the Kraken still lives. Not as a beast waiting below, but as a whisper inside us, a reminder that the unknown is never truly gone. It only changes form. It moves from sea to story, from darkness to dream. The ocean, after all, never forgets. Every ship that sailed, every storm that passed, every voice that told a tale. It holds them all in its endless blue memory. Maybe that's why standing near it feels like standing close to history itself. It's not just water you're hearing, it's time. The sea remembers the laughter of sailors and the cries of storms. It remembers sunlight breaking over calm mornings and the silence that follows tragedy. It remembers the myths told by firelight and the quiet hopes whispered to the horizon. It carries them all, layer upon layer, until its depths become the memory of everything that ever lived. And as we tell its stories, in whispers or in dreams, we give a little piece of ourselves back to it. We become part of that great remembering. So maybe the Kraken was never meant to be defeated or explained. Maybe it was meant to remind us that mystery is not an enemy. It is a gift, a space left open for wonder to live, because even now, after all we've learned and all we've seen, there are still places the light cannot reach. And maybe that's good. Maybe that's necessary. Because in those shadows, imagination still breathes. As you close your eyes tonight, imagine the deep. Not the dark, but the endless. Imagine the waves moving slowly, endlessly, carrying stories that never end. Somewhere out there, far below, life still drifts, strange, luminous, silent. The world continues, timeless and alive. And in that calm rhythm of the sea, there's something comforting. The realization that no matter how small we are still part of the same great song, the same story, the same memory. The sea remembers, and through its endless echo, so do we. Thank you for listening, for drifting through history, myth, and mystery. May the ocean's peace stay with you tonight. Gentle, steady, infinite. Sleep well, traveler of stories. And remember, the sea is never truly silent. It's just waiting for you to listen. And so, our voyage comes to an end. We've followed the stories of sailors and scientists, of fear and fascination, and through it all, we found that the Kraken is more than a monster. It's a reflection of us, of our curiosity, our courage, and our endless need to understand the unknown. Because the sea, it never gives up its secrets easily. It just whispers them, wave by wave, to those who listen long enough. Maybe that's why the legend still lives. Not because the Kraken was ever caught, but because deep down, we don't want it to be. It's comforting somehow to know there are still mysteries the world refuses to explain. Places that remain dark, deep, and full of wonder. So, as you drift off tonight, imagine the ocean, calm and infinite, the waves breathing slowly against the shore, and far below, in the quiet dark, something ancient stirs. Not as a threat, but as a memory. Thank you for joining this journey. If this story brought you peace, curiosity, or even just a soft moment of wonder, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. There are more stories waiting below the surface, gentle, mysterious, and full of history. Until next time, sleep well, and may the sea's eternal rhythm carry you into peaceful dreams.